Hi, I'm Stephen Feinberg, Executive Director of the Rhode Island Film and Television Office. Our guests tonight are part of the prestigious PBS family. This includes the Senior Director of Programming for WGBH, Ron Bachman, and the Programming Manager at WGBH, Devin Karambelas. Welcome to Double Feature.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Stephen. It's great to be here.
Now you guys have come down from Massachusetts to visit us here in Rhode Island. Ron, what's your background and how did you start getting involved in WGBH?
Well, most of my career has been there. I didn't start out in television, however. In fact, I kind of fell into it completely by accident. I'm a former English major. I thought I was going to get into publishing and do things with, that involved writing. And the closest I came to that out of college was working for a little while at TV Guide magazine. And the office I worked at did what was then the Boston regional edition of the magazine. And after I'd been there for a while and was starting to get restless, somebody said to me, my contact at WGBH is leaving. You'd probably like it there. And I decided to reach out. I applied for the job, did an interview, and within weeks I was literally moving from my home in Pennsylvania to Boston to take a job. And I worked for about 4 years in sort of the communications area and got interested in programming and took advantage of an opportunity that came up. And I've been in programming in one way or another ever since.
And that has been how many years?
That would be almost 36 years.
36 years.
Yeah.
He started when he was 5 and now
Exactly right.
Wow.
As a child prodigy.
So it's 36 years. It's been a home to you.
It has been. It has
That's
been.
wonderful.
Yeah, it really
and Devin, how long have you been here and how did you get involved? What's your background?
Sure. So back in college, I thought that I was firmly on the journalism track. And I think the qualities that attracted me to working in journalism are actually the same ones that attracted me to wanting to work in film and television. So storytelling, adapting audiovisual technologies to immerse people in different worlds, the opportunity to work with creative and sometimes crazy people. And I truly thought that that's what I'd be doing. But actually, I interned at the Rhode Island Film Festival years ago.
That's where we met.
Exactly. And that was my very first opportunity to work in the industry in some way. And I completely fell in love with it. So most of my career to this point, which has not been very long, has been mostly in film distribution and film exhibition. How film and television reaches people, reaches audiences, those are the questions that interest me.
Wonderful. And you were in Edinburgh for a while?
I was, yeah. So I went to school at the University of Edinburgh and I got my master's in something called film exhibition and curation. And it was an amazing degree, and I was able to actually work in the film industry in Edinburgh and nearby in Glasgow. And being able to work internationally in this business it taught me a lot.
Right.
And it was really nice to be able to come back to the U.S. and find an opportunity where I could actually use my degree, because a lot of what Ron and I do is curate.
That's wonderful. And what are some of the highlights? Maybe, Ron, you've seen the growth of the digital media. Mm-hmm. You've seen the expansion, correct? So are there any highlights that you look back on fondly of your career at WGBH?
Yeah, I would say one that comes immediately to mind is back around 15 years ago when the whole television industry switched over from analog to digital. That opened up this whole opportunity for additional channels. Suddenly stations didn't just have one linear channel, they had the bandwidth to do multiple channels. And knowing that this was coming, GBH and a number of other stations in major markets had kind of gotten together and started brainstorming about what this could mean for our industry. And it all ended up resulting in the creation of 2 nationally syndicated, essentially, public television channels, the World Channel and Create. So World is, a nonfiction documentary news channel. Create is a lifestyle and kind of how-to channel. They both were launched jointly between us and WNET in New York in 2004, and since then have expanded out. So I think Create is now seen in 80% or more of the country, and World is approaching 70% of the country. And since the beginning, I've been the programmer for World, so creating that schedule. And the Create schedule is done out of New York with folks there. And I'm particularly proud of that, because I feel like those channels have made a real impact, and I was there from the very beginning of those.
That's wonderful. When you're talking about programming, Create as an example, are you doing it like the old days of, hey, we have a new season coming and this is how it's going to be, or is it weekly? How does that work? The programming for a network.
Yeah, it's a little bit different for World and Create, and I can speak a little bit more intelligently about World since that's my baby, I suppose. But I'll try to address both channels. You know, Create is drawing from a very large inventory of programming in the, broadly speaking, lifestyle vein. And these are all shows that are in distribution to public television stations and available to them, but there are far more such programs than any individual station could run on their primary channel. So Create's taking advantage of that and building a schedule that, you know, painting and woodworking and cooking, especially cooking and crafts and all that kind of thing. And their schedule is, so shows kind of constantly come in and out of that schedule as new seasons come along. With World, you know, we're also working with inventory of programs that come from PBS and other public television sources, but in more recent years we've actually developed original content that is only seen on World, and those are a little bit more seasonal. So our flagship series is one called America Reframed, which focuses on documentaries on domestic issues, and we do have a sort of moment each year where there's a new season that launches, and we have several other series in that vein as well. So that's the broad strokes of how it works.
And Devin, I know you love the show Frontline.
Mm-hmm.
Is that locally created, or where is that?
It is, yeah. So actually, before I was the programming manager at WGBH, I was assisting WGBH's vice president of national programming and national productions. So there are 6 national series that are made in Boston. So that's Masterpiece, Frontline, Antiques Roadshow, Nova, American Experience, and
I'm
Studio
stopping
6.
you.
Yeah.
Those are like the phenomenal shows.
Yeah.
And they come out of Boston.
Powerhouses,
Yeah.
absolutely. Wow. Yeah, and so that, you know, for lack of a better phrase, I kind of got to see how the sausage gets made a little bit. And it's really incredible. I mean, I think that some of the smartest and most talented filmmakers and television makers in our industry work and live in Boston, which is very special to be a part of that.
And I'm going to give a little shout out to one of our Rhode Island filmmakers, Gary Glassman,
Yes.
who's done quite a bit of Nova work.
Absolutely. He did Native America, which
Yes.
was an excellent 4-part series that we brought back this past November, and it did pretty well.
And
he's great.
He's done quite a few, and he's right at Providence Pictures.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
a little shout out to Rhode Island as well.
We love him.
Yeah. So what kind of budgets are we talking about for like a show like Frontline or Nova? Like what kind of budgets do they have?
Well, maybe you know more than I do because I'm not really privy to their budgetary information. I can tell you, however, it's never enough.
Right.
Is probably
Less
the
than
answer.
you'd think.
Right.
And it is less than you'd think. They make
High
they go a long
quality.
way on you know, compared to the commercial world, a long way on a fairly small amount of money. But you know, the funding comes from a variety of places. PBS commissions these shows from us and controls the rights nationally. So they put some money into it, but there's funding from foundations and underwriters and things like that is kind of cobbled together. I suspect that compared to the budgets for commercial network shows, they're pretty modest.
Right. What about when you're talking about your programming? So are you looking at certain analytics? Are you looking at, is Nielsen ratings still something that is a useful tool? Can you talk about how you go about your programming? And then also, do you have your own maybe professional mandates or personal mandates, things that you want to see? How does that work in the programming?
Well, to answer your first question, yes, we do. We are a Nielsen subscriber. We get data from them. It's you know, and it's that the level of data, the detail of that data has gotten deeper over the years as Nielsen's measurement technology has evolved. So we can look at not only how many people in aggregate watched a show, but you know, how many of them were women and men and what age they were and that sort of thing. And so that helps us determine the kinds of things that we're going to acquire when we can talk about that a little bit more, and also where we schedule things. We do try to keep in mind, you know, we're never going to compete head on with the big powerhouse network television shows, the ones that are extremely popular. But we do keep in mind what's airing elsewhere in the television universe on a given night and time, so that we're not trying to schedule something that's going to appeal to the same audience that's watching that show.
Right.
And as far as mandates go, I mean, it's less about personal mandates, although we each have our own preferences for genres and stuff. We're both drama junkies, for instance, and
Right.
and we start with programming that we get from PBS and kind of build the schedule from there. But they don't provide enough programming to fill all the time that we have in our schedule across our various channels. So there are other suppliers that we get things from, and in some instances we are selecting shows that we pay license fees for to buy. And while, for instance, we have a lot of fun looking at drama shows and deciding which ones we think will work, we're also driven to a large extent by what we know our audience wants. And every once in a while we might acquire something we know is not going to get a huge audience, but we think is worth getting out there.
Eyeballs on.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and getting exposure for. But a lot of it is really trying to keep in mind what over time we've learned about what draws our audiences to us, and giving them more of what they want.
What is it? What's the magic of PBS, do you think? Like, what is your audience looking for? Quality, we know that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think quality and intelligence, and certainly in this sort of news and documentary realm, I think a certain level of kind of
Critical thinking?
critical thinking, and that's a good way to put it. I think people know that they're not going to be talked down to, that we're going to assume that they're smart enough to do this stuff. But we're also not trying to make, and we sometimes fail in this goal, but we're not trying to make eat your vegetables television.
Right.
We want to make television that's vibrant and meaningful and gripping.
Yeah.
Right.
But that mission is still so critical to what PBS does and to what it means for people, whether you're talking about children's programming, history, news, and current affairs. And I think if you look at the history of the public broadcasting system, wherever there's been a gap, PBS has always supplemented it or provided a different perspective, an alternative perspective. When the arts and entertainment channel stopped running arts and entertainment, PBS doubled down. When the History Channel began airing less history, American Experience filled that gap. I think there's been a long tradition of PBS it has to serve the needs of a lot of different viewers who have different political affiliations, and I think it's done a really wonderful job of putting together great general audience programming.
I think it's more important now than ever. There's so many different fabrics of fiction or television.
Absolutely.
And so many channels now. But to have PBS as the anchor for high quality, like we talked about, critical thinking, informing, and it's really so important.
I don't know how many people are aware of this, but even in the children's area, the children's programs that come through PBS all have a very specific and robust curriculum embedded in them. It may not always be apparent when you're watching it, but there may be a curriculum that involves teaching kids rudimentary math skills or literacy skills or whatever.
Bilingual.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's good TV too.
But it's also very entertaining.
Entertaining.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very entertaining. I think that the fact that we're non-commercial sets us apart from the commercial industry, because they have an imperative to make money.
Right.
And they're going to do that whatever way it takes to do that. And while we obviously rely on support from CPB and from our viewers and foundations and other places, that's not our overriding imperative, is to make money. It's to make quality programs that mean something to people.
And I think it's actually one of the interesting things when I think about PBS is that we live in a time now where niche programming is huge, and we can look at streaming services, different channels that have popped up that serve very specific interests and needs in communities. But I think PBS has always done that. For a long time, it was one of the only places where you could see foreign dramas, short films, independent films, and we keep doing that, and we keep expanding this. And I think that's also something where PBS has been sort of ahead of its time in a lot of ways.
What about the idea that people are using their phones now as a distribution outlet, and also maybe attention spans being shorter? Does that have an effect on your programming at all?
I think where it comes into play is, and this is a change I've seen over the years that I've been there. It used to be that my job was about putting a schedule together for a linear television channel, and the word curation has become very much a buzzword in the industry lately, but it's actually an appropriate one because more and more our jobs now involve thinking about not just what show might work well on Tuesday night at 8, but where other platforms on which these shows can be seen. So we think of ourselves increasingly as curators as opposed to programmers, and have really made an effort to try to extend our reach into other areas to the extent we can. We, for instance, were actually the first public television station in the country to buy a batch of programs that were intended for streaming only. We didn't buy broadcast rights, just streaming rights. They were available only to our members. And there are other stations that have now followed suit. But that was a foray that we made in that direction some years ago now.
What about programming that you acquire? How much of it is locally made? And I say locally, maybe in a New England atmosphere, or how much is international? Like, do you have a idea of where that comes from?
Well, and certainly in terms of the money that we spend, we're in the unusual position of essentially having two primary channels, WGBH Channel 2, WGBX 44. Most stations around the system don't have that. So GBH2 is really the kind of PBS flagship in the Boston market, but we have a lot more flexibility on 44, and in recent years we've built up a strong drama lineup there. And most of those shows are acquisitions, so I think a lot of people don't even know that. They just assume we're getting them from PBS. We're actually selecting these shows and paying for them and bringing them to our audience. We do a certain amount of acquisition of local or regional independent films. It's a fairly small number over the course of a year. And we tend to give, we get a lot of stuff submitted to us. Not all of it is up to our standards or appropriate for public television, but of the stuff that is, we tend to give priority to films that are either on a topic of particular local interest or from a local or regional filmmaker. So we do a certain amount of that. We don't have a regular standing weekly series to showcase that sort of thing. It's more opportunistic, but as these things become available, a few years ago we bought a film from a filmmaker based on Nantucket, I believe, about the lighthouse there, and the fact that there was a lighthouse that was moved to keep it from, when the land was eroding. They were concerned it was going to fall into the sea, and it was a historic lighthouse. Nova actually did an episode about that, about the sort of science and engineering of it. But this local filmmaker actually had done a film that was more about the impact on the community and how folks had come together around this project. And so we were able to actually play those two films together at one point, I think, so that it gave two different angles on the same topic. And it was a local story.
And that also, I'm sorry. It also means that Ron and I spend a lot of time watching things, which is one of the more fun aspects of the job. And to be honest, when I first started this position, I think I was not prepared for how much watching, and it's been great. I keep feeling like I'm going to be found out any minute because I've sort of found the perfect career for me. But that's not to say that there's a lot of, we have to pay attention to things. We have to think very critically. Sometimes you have to put your preferences for a particular genre or way of filmmaking or television making aside. And so I guess the exercise and the thought that goes into it is that is very interesting for me, and it's wonderful to have a mentor like Ron to be able to talk through these things with.
Do you have you ever watched something and said, oh my God, this is fantastic, I've got to call Ron, we're going to look at this, I want him to see this? Does that happen?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's actually, in the background of my mind now. When I watch things, no matter how I'm watching them or where I'm watching them, I'm thinking about programming. Do we have something like this? Would this work on our air? Should I talk to Ron about this?
Right.
I will say Ron has an encyclopedic knowledge of I think, in my opinion, film and television, and it's hard. I think it would be hard to stump you. I don't think that there are too many hidden gems at the moment that I've found that I really don't think Ron has seen, because you seem to,
or at least be aware of.
or be aware of.
Right.
He's got a really good. He seems to pay attention to a lot of different types of content that's out there. So
now, what about? Are some of the shows that are the fictional shows that you acquire? They're all different genres, but and you've got period. Do you say, well, we have 2 period shows, so we're not going to do more period now, we're going to do contemporary? How does that work?
Well,
is there a chemistry?
There is, although it's a little bit different than what you just described, and that is because a lot of the series that we acquire don't tend to have a lot of episodes. Series are always coming in and out of the schedule. So what we have learned over the years is that there are certain time slots where we have programmed certain types of shows that we think have an affinity. So if people like this show, when it's done, the series that comes along in that slot afterwards, we hope they will like too.
Right. If you like this, you'll love this.
Exactly. And so that kind of thinking has informed our scheduling. And so if we have 2, say, period shows, rather than running them at the same time on different nights, we may actually run them in the same time slot consecutively in order to keep the audience. I mean, one of the things that's true of public television, or of the PBS lineup, that is sort of anchored on Channel 2, is that there's a lot of anthology type shows. So even Nova, which is in the schedule every week, one week it may be archaeology, the next week it may be astronomy. Somebody who likes archaeology may not like astronomy, so it's kind of hard to get people coming back every week. With dramas, you have a much better chance of doing that, and that's one of the reasons that we built up a drama slate on 44, was to keep people, get them hooked and keep them coming back. And one way of doing that, of course, is by running this episodes of the same series every week. But then if you follow that with another series that you think they'll like, they will hopefully stick around for that too. We've seen that a couple of times where we've introduced a new series on the heels of one that is kind of proven and popular, and we haven't seen the audience levels drop because people clearly say, oh, I like this too.
And that, again, is based on the analytics. Do you also get personal feedback? Do you get do you get viewer mail or viewer emails, or how does that all?
Well, we're unusual for a public television station in that we have a pretty large audience and member services department that field a lot of queries from viewers. When there's a kind of critical mass of something, they let us know, hey, people love this, hey, people hate this, But honestly, a number of years ago, we started a monthly screening series that it's for members usually, and it gives them a chance to get an early look at something that's coming up in our schedule. It could be a Nova episode, a Nature episode, Masterpiece, whatever. And that's an opportunity to really just talk with people. And because you're talking with people who are very invested in what you're doing, they're giving you very
honest feedback.
And very clear feedback, and that's really helpful to hear it.
Yeah.
So.
Can you talk about where you see public television or WGBH going in the next, let's say, 5 years?
Well, I touched on it earlier. I think that it really is about, we're going to continue making the best content we can make, and that's nobody's ever questioned that.
Right.
But I think that where things are changing is where that content is seen. So I think it's vital to the survival of public television that we are everywhere viewers are.
Absolutely.
And whether that's on their phone or on a laptop or on an iPad or wherever, streaming service in some cases. So there's a lot of emphasis on that. There's an increasing emphasis on creating content for digital platforms that may not air on television. Sometimes content is created for digital and migrates to TV rather than the old school way of starting on television and thinking of digital as just kind of this ancillary thing. So I think that there's going to be more and more of an emphasis
Won't there
on
be
that.
more of a blur of what is television?
Probably.
So many people I talk to now, they don't have the regular television subscription or the cable.
Yeah.
Right.
Everything is
It's
streaming.
watching.
And there's
streaming
finite, attention, so we're all competing for that.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of possibilities with the medium. We're seeing more women and more people of color, both in front of and behind the camera. We're seeing different genre possibilities. As Ron said, there is content that is being specifically designed for certain platforms to achieve a certain experience. And recently, actually last month, PBS is now on YouTube TV. We have a really wonderful app. We've got a fabulous membership benefit called PBS Passport.
What does that do? Tell the audience, because this is you're actually talking to a PBS audience now.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
So what is the PBS Passport?
Do you want to explain?
Sure. Well, Passport is essentially it's a streaming service. So most of what you see on television, you can actually then stream subsequently on Passport. The PBS app has this sort of layered approach because anybody can, public television's mandate from the federal government is to make content available to everybody.
Right.
And so this kind of approach has evolved where for the first couple of weeks after a show airs on television, it can be watched on the PBS app by anybody who has that app for free. After which it moves behind a member paywall, and if you are a member, then you can continue to watch it for many months or even years after that.
You also get extras too, like
Yeah, I was
behind the
just-
scenes.
Well,
Absolutely,
yes, you
yeah.
do. You get some short form content. There's content that gets created for PBS Digital that sometimes lives there as well. And increasingly, PBS has started to put content on Passport that is either full shows, that is either exclusive to it, or has a several month window where you can only see it on Passport and then it may be made available for broadcast. There are a number of foreign language dramas that follow that pattern, where they premiere on Passport and then later down the line they become available for broadcast.
Well, I want to thank you both so very much for doing the work that you're doing, having the passion that you have for public television, for quality filmmaking for our audience. And I want to thank you both so much for coming to Double Feature, and we hope to have you back.
Well, thank you for
Thanks,
having us. It's
Stephen.
been a
Yeah.
pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks
Wonderful.
for watching.
Yeah, thanks for watching. And thank you for being here tonight.